Thank you all for joining us here today. It's no secret that people are traumatized by the impacts that we're seeing. I guess today a new record was set in the European market, $143 a barrel. And this rapid increase in oil price and gasoline price has exposed the vulnerabilities of American families to what President Bush famously said was an addiction to oil. Talked about it, but we really haven't done much about it. In fact, gas prices have tripled since 2001. They take a larger and larger bite out of the family budget. Transportation for years has been the second largest item in the family budget, second only to housing. But we're finding now for more and more families, it's actually the #1 budget item. And frankly, I think we're all acknowledging that we've seen the last of cheap oil. People recognize that what we're seeing here is a long-term trend around which we've built our economy and, to many of us, our daily lives. Oil is getting harder to find, and at the same time, we're competing with hundreds of millions in China and India and around the globe who want to use it much as we have. And our families continue to suffer because our policies are too deeply rooted in an energy policy from the 1950s. Now, there is a questionable premise that's being circulated by some of my colleagues in Washington, D.C., that the answer here is to just go to some of our most environmentally sensitive areas, turn them over to large oil companies, and drain America dry. That somehow that's a solution to the problems of today. And the fact is that that's not a solution. First of all, that assumes that the oil companies would do something different than that with the 68 million acres they already have that's available. It ignores the fact that every expert agrees that if you're going to drain America dry, it's going to take 10 to 20 years before any of that oil gets into the system. And it's going to have a tiny effect on the massive global market. And one other thing that we're asking people to consider is that this strategy of draining America dry and turning our energy future, what remains of these lands, over to large international oil companies, where does that leave us in 30 or 40 years when all our oil is gone? We're at the tender mercies of people in other parts of the globe who might not be as sensitive to our needs, when oil will be far more expensive and there will be less of it. Part of what we need to do in the political process is to be honest with people that there isn't some single, simple, magic bullet that's going to solve this problem. It has taken us decades to paint ourselves into this corner. But there are things that we can do now that will make a difference over the course of the next 3 or 4 months, not 3 or 4 decades. And I'm here today to announce a legislative proposal that I've been developing that will give American families and the communities that they live in more choices, to level the playing field for people who want to be less auto-dependent, and encourage the federal government to be a better partner and lead by example. I'm going to touch briefly on some of the elements, and then I'm going to turn to some of our community leaders here who have been part of what we have done in Portland that is already making a difference. You know, the gasoline prices pinch here. It's making a difference to families here. But in the national scheme of things, because we have worked for decades to provide more choices for our families, we actually end up driving 20% less. And even before it was $4 a gallon gasoline and above, the average family was saving over $2,000 a year that they could spend on housing or health care or education. And we're finding that because we are a community that gives people more choices, that we haven't seen the precipitous decline in housing prices that you're seeing in many communities where people are trapped in their SUV 20, 30, 40 miles away for their daily commute. We're already seeing the benefit here in our community, but there's more that we can do to equip Portland better and to share that in other parts of the country. One important thing we need to do is to increase commuter choices and provide funding so that families are less oil dependent. Right now, families that choose transit are not treated as generously under the tax code as people who drive to work and get free parking. But transit at least is better than those poor souls like some of us who burn calories to bike to work instead of fossil fuel. We're shut out under the tax code. I've been able to pass a bike commuter benefit 3 times through the House. It is yet to be enacted into law. That needs to be part of a comprehensive effort to not penalize people who ride bikes. We want to extend transportation fringe benefits to people who are self-employed. We want to allow people who get a parking benefit from their employees, from their employer, if they want to cash it out and use that for transportation that makes more sense for them and their families. Right now they can't do that without tax consequences. Doesn't make any difference to the employer, doesn't make any difference to the federal government. We ought to give families that choice. We want to extend credits for van pool expenses, a tax credit for qualified employers and employees who telecommute that could make a difference throughout the state. We want to help transit agencies cope with rising fuel prices, make it easier for federal funding for streetcars. 4 years after my small starts legislation, the Federal Department of Transportation still can't figure out how to evaluate it properly, and this legislation would instruct them how to evaluate it. We want to provide housing assistance for families that choose to live in areas where they are more accessible for transportation, for transit. Oftentimes those are more expensive, but under the way the rules work now, they don't get credit for reducing their transportation. Actually, they're a better credit risk if they choose to drive more, but they don't get help for the often more expensive loans that they need. We need to change that process. Finally, we want to make sure that the federal government leads by example by extending our transportation fringe benefits to all our employees, not just to a few of them. These are things that we're putting into the legislation. We started to move forward this last week with some in Congress, but this is the first comprehensive package that would empower families to take the commuter choices that will help them withstand some of the impacts of these high gas prices.